It seemed too brilliant to fail. Ever since the SCP Foundation perfected its dimensional displacement technology and created a stable two-way path into the Backrooms, they seemingly discovered an infinite number of uses for it, from extra storage space to a reserve energy source drawn from ambient interdimensional radiation. But could it provide a balm to one of the Foundation's greatest anxieties, creating a permanent and reliable containment chamber for SCP-096, the Shy Guy? Everything would need to be executed perfectly to avoid a total disaster. The portal technology was taken out to a desert thousands of miles away from the nearest population center. SCP-096's containment cube was carried over underneath the Chinook dual-rotor helicopter. In addition to all the researchers, containment specialists, and mobile task force operatives, one member of D-Class personnel, Gary, was also here to take one for the team. Gary was given a Polaroid picture in an envelope and told to open it, as the other personnel in attendance all retreated to a safe distance. The second he saw the horrid pale grimace on the Polaroid, he heard a pained, wailing echo from the dull confines of the giant metal cube. He didn't have long to ponder this awful keening before it was interrupted by the humming of machinery as the researchers initialized the Backrooms transport technology. It was an act of perfect timing. As soon as SCP-096 burst free from its cube with murderous intent, it and Gary were both enveloped by crackling blue tongues of energy from the machine. Both were no-clipped, not out of existence, just out of existence here. When both of them hit the ground, it was on the revolting beige carpets of the Backrooms, where the yellow was bright and piercing and the humbuzz of the fluorescent lights reigned supreme.
What the hell is going on here?
Was all Gary could scream as 096 appeared behind him and gave chase. The conventional wisdom with SCP-096 is that when you see its face, you're a dead man walking, no matter what happens next. When the anomaly's rage state is activated, it gains an inherent psychic awareness of its intended victim's position at all times. It would then travel in a relatively straight line, effortlessly smashing through any barrier in its way. But would being in a completely different dimension flip the script? Gary's concerns weren't nearly as high-minded. He just found himself frantically running through a honeycomb of nonsense hallways as the howling, shrieking monster chased him, often smashing through the straight walls to get to him faster. This was all like a nightmare he had after watching those Kane Pixels videos before he got the death penalty and became an SCP Foundation guinea pig. His muscles burned, his lungs disgorged the last of their air. He could feel the breeze of the monster's grasping claws on his back. And just when it seemed like it couldn't get any worse, he turned a corner and saw that this latest terrible hallway was a dead end. All of it had been for nothing. He froze. He knew it was over. He was expecting to feel teeth and claws around him at any moment, but instead there was this insane flash of light, so sudden and intense that it seemed to shock both Gary and SCP-096. Another portal inside the Backrooms. Before SCP-096 could utterly annihilate its prey, a skein of thick, oily black tentacles emerged from the glowing portal and enveloped Gary, dragging him through. The light vanished in that same instant, leaving SCP-096 alone in that maddening yellow hallway. This was confusing for the beast. In fact, it was downright unprecedented. The target, Gary, was still here, somewhere in the Backrooms supra-dimension, but no longer on this level. It was as though someone had thrown off its mental GPS. It could only make out the vague impression that Gary was out there somewhere and needed to be destroyed, but his exact location was a complete mystery. For once, the Shy Guy would actually need to search for its prey. SCP-096 was exposed to many strange and impossible sights while trapped inside the labyrinth of Level 0. From a tesseract of refracted McDonald's play places, to what appeared to be a giant glowing YouTube subscribe button. Which reminds me, what are you doing watching this far into the video if you're not subscribed? Come on, hit the subscribe button and never miss another video from SCP Explained. You have no idea the secrets that are about to be exposed if you stick around. But back to SCP-096. The monster was still being guided by the foggy impression of Gary's presence across multiple layers of this fractured reality. It knew he was out there. It just needed to be a little more creative in finding him. But creativity had never been SCP-096's specialty, so it instead pushed all of its chips forward onto the next best thing: brute strength. The creature swept from confusion to rage again and began hammering its clenched fists against the squelching carpeted floor. Despite the creature's emaciated frame, its strength was tremendous. It wasn't long before the carpet had been torn away fully, and the hardwood beneath began to splinter under the raw power of the Shy Guy's blows. When the floor fully collapsed and the Shy Guy fell through, it was to a different place entirely. Level 1. This was at least a little more familiar to the Shy Guy, appearing in some ways like a Foundation containment site. Concrete warehouses, corridors, parking complexes, an industrial wasteland, a brutalist afterlife. It was also a lot like an SCP Foundation containment site, in the sense that the Shy Guy wasn't the only monster here, but it hadn't realized that quite yet. It began loping through the dark, echoing concrete vistas, feeling the psychic impression of Gary just that little bit clearer now. He wasn't here on this level, no, but it was a level closer at least. Progress. Not being the most intelligent of the creatures, it decided to use its other tactic first, smashing its fists into the ground again. Concrete cracked and splintered into clouds of gray dust, but this method didn't bear much fruit for 096. No matter how much concrete it smashed, there seemed to be more underneath. Every strike echoed through the annals of Level 1, and unlike Level 0, there were many things walking and crawling and slithering around in the dark to hear it. 096 looked up when it heard a strange noise, the wet slapping of sweaty flesh against cold stone. There was an avalanche of beings rolling towards it, messes of twisted limbs, eyeless, faceless. These were the Clumps, and because they could not see SCP-096 attacking on the basis of sound alone, they didn't activate the monster's rage state. Well, until they started attacking. There were dozens of them, but 096 had taken on hundreds of combatants at once before, and ones far deadlier than these. As the Clumps tried to pile on, it grabbed them in its gnarled grip and tore them away, throwing them in all directions and splattering their feeble bodies against the nearby walls. It tore through so many of them before the rest began to relent, squealing and rolling away in retreat. But they weren't rolling away because of SCP-096. While the Shy Guy had been consumed with taking care of the Clumps, the wall behind it shimmered like the surface of a lake. 3 tall, twisting dullers stepped out of it, no-clipping silently into the zone behind 096. If it was at all capable of compassion, it might have seen some kind of kinship with the dullers. Emaciated humanoids cursed to endlessly hunt human beings, and faceless, much like the dullers. But here in the Backrooms, it was every monster for itself. The dullers attacked the Shy Guy all at once, wrestling it and tugging on its limbs, perhaps hoping to neutralize its tremendous strength. But that very same strength would be their undoing. The Shy Guy shrieked and reached back with its free arm, grabbing one of the dullers by its featureless head and flipping it over to the ground in front of it, smashing its body against the concrete. The other 2 disengaged and tried to no-clip away through a nearby wall, hoping that it would save them from the Shy Guy's wrath. Sadly, in their primitive minds, ruled by instinct, they had no idea just how persistent their new enemy was. 096 simply barged through the wall with them in a cascade of broken bricks and rebar. It grasped the dullers and tore them limb from limb with complete ease, but that wouldn't buy it any lasting peace. There were a number of long, grasping arms reaching down from a vent positioned above. Yes, this entity is literally just called arms. They lunged for the Shy Guy's back and raked their claws across its pale flesh, exposing its unbreakable bones underneath. And somehow, even worse was coming. All the commotion had attracted a growler, a huge lumbering beast made out of multicolored pipe cleaners. Yes, we're serious, just deal with it. The creature let out an almighty roar and charged towards the Shy Guy, ramming its body and pushing it over a railing, tumbling down through the dark towards a wet, misty concrete platform. The growler hit the ground moments later, continuing its chase towards the dazed Shy Guy. It was the largest and most dodged of the Backrooms threats yet, but the Shy Guy had no intention of holding back. With one iron-strong claw, it reached into the nest of pipe cleaners and ripped out a handful, in what must have been the pipe cleaner equivalent of a Mortal Kombat fatality. With its rainbow heart ripped out, the growler collapsed onto the ground, dead. The Shy Guy was confused by this whole affair, but it really didn't care what strange Backrooms entities decided to bum rush it out here. It only needed to find and annihilate Gary to relieve this terrible anxiety of having been seen. Not even being in a completely different dimension relieved the pain of knowing someone was out there bearing a memory of its face. Being seen, being known. It was sickening, agonizing even. It would do anything to relieve that pain, even if it meant ripping all the way through this damned dimension to do it. It kept searching through this gray hellscape, letting the dull ache inside it, the impression of Gary's distant presence, act as its North Star. As it lumbered into a nearby hallway layered with twisted, rusty pipes, it suddenly found itself enshrouded in darkness. Strange. It was as though all the lights in both directions suddenly switched off. But that didn't bother SCP-096 that much. It was following the psychic impression itself, not the lights. But then another light did illuminate at the far end of that cold, dark hallway. Eyes and teeth, the glowing countenance of a smiler, a hungry, cartoon-faced nightmare predator. Or at least, it would be for a human. As soon as the smiler's glowing eyes clapped onto the shy guy's face, the dynamic was flipped, and the hunter had immediately become the hunted. The shy guy wailed and screamed and scratched at its face. For a moment, the smiler might have assumed, like its human prey, the shy guy was doing all of this out of fear upon seeing such a frightening, impossible being. But that fantasy was immediately destroyed when SCP-096 came rushing at the smiler, its arms extended and claws grasping. For the first time in its existence, it was the smiler's turn to run. It tried to flee into the darkness, wafting like a living cloud of fear, but the shy guy didn't relent, lunging and chasing through the halls. Eventually, even the smiler ran out of energy, and the shy guy caught and tore to pieces its inky, insubstantial form. It was yet another creature to add to the count, but not a replacement for what it needed to do to Gary. What was this strange and ridiculous place? Finding a victim had never been this hard before. There were other creatures that it encountered while traversing the pipes and dingy storage sheds of Level 1. The entities that seemed the most similar to humans were the wretches, disgusting blackened zombies that shambled through the murk, looking for victims to attack and devour. In SCP-096, they would find no such victim. Their eyes activated the rage of the shy guy, who shredded them one by one, wails and roars reverberating off the walls. To a human being in the Backrooms, the skin stealers were a terrifying threat. Blobby humanoid beasts that ambush lone human prey and kill them in some terrible and unknowable way before peeling off their skin and devouring what's inside. Then, they wear that skin as a suit and imitate the person they once were. Enough skin stealers could infiltrate a group of survivors in the Backrooms from within and slowly destroy them all. But to the shy guy, the skin stealer might as well just been another human, another pair of eyes to gaze upon it, another looker that might be destroyed for the crime of seeing its face. These creatures that made humans cower and flee tried in vain to run from its wailing, grasping horror. It tore through the skin stealers easily, leaving chunks of white goo and a trail of viscous clear fluid in its wake. The hounds and the wranglers were just as easy. The hounds might have been human once, before twisted into a grim parody of the canine form, drooling and hungry. Deadly to humans in packs, but still just as easily shredded by 096. The wranglers, ink-black snake-like entities that wrap around and crush their prey, presented somewhat more of a challenge as they slithered around the shy guy's body and squeezed. But when 096 grasped the creatures' bodies and squeezed back, the tables were very much turned. Every creature was another obstacle on the path to Gary. 096 knew that it just needed to keep going, keep ascending levels, keep hunting, keep killing. Nothing so far had been a challenge, and it didn't anticipate that changing. Though, of course, the shy guy had no idea what was waiting for it on Level 5. Now check out what if SCP-682 has finally met his match in the Backrooms, or could SCP-682 be contained in the Backrooms? For more.